Well, I have to admit I'm not stocked up for the holidays, but I may have some obscure 70s fusion records in the kitchen that you can analyze. Why don't you step on in? Well, it won't be that easy. Welcome to Witchy's Lane. In order to earn your jazz songs, I'll be trapping you in here with me to watch 10 minutes of Bit Blitz talking about video game cave music. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Toodaloo!
Dark tunnels and mysterious caverns are nearly ubiquitous in video games, and although there are some clear similarities between composers in terms of how they score these environments, there's also been a ton of diversity in the underground music landscape. Before composers had room for full quality audio and immersive effects, they often had to be much more creative and adventurous in their pursuit of a creepy cave vibe. If you look back far enough, some of the early arcade and home console classics didn't even have music. Boulder Dash, for example, seems to have received a ripping soundtrack for the NES version in 1990, but initial versions just featured a handful of sound effects and the earth-toned ambiance. And other early games like Spelunker aren't really of much use to us because many of these had lively music, which, while fantastic in many cases, doesn't appear to directly reference its ominous surroundings. It's more like these tracks are a hit single associated with the game rather than underscore, which evolves with the visual environment. Many games in this era seem to just feature cave environments, possibly due to dark motionless backgrounds being as commonplace as they were. And maybe as a result of this, plenty of them would just choose not to use music to address anything ominous about the surroundings. This approach seems to change though in 1985 when the Mario Brothers introduced the super to their name. This might be the most recognizable underground theme of all time. The musical trope you could point out here is emphasizing the bass line, which, sort of like a subterranean situation, is just lower than the higher melodies of the previous area. The chromatic line at the end is sort of creepy and indicates that composer Koji Kondo was at least starting to emphasize the idea of caves being more creepy and disorienting. The bass line before this section, though, is pretty funky. It kind of seems that Kondo was listening to a Lee Ritenour tune called Let's Not Talk About It, which features the exact same bass line in the same key, with the same time signature, and basically the same tempo. And just to be clear, this was a common practice in the early video game era known as replaying. Like in hip-hop, this is the art of reproducing a tone or a section from another song within your own work, rather than directly sampling it. In the case of the underground theme, Mario's composer crafted a song around this motif, adding additional elements and coding it into a format that Nintendo's early 80s technology could play back. There is certainly an argument to be made that this chunk of song is just a bit too much to ethically borrow from the Friendship Band, but also like in hip-hop during this time, the ethics of that were just brand new and being freshly debated. I will give Koji Kondo credit for adding a pretty involved B section. By Mario 64, the underground theme had developed a character and musical lineage of its own, and the bass line was reworked into its current 4/4 form. In Hazy Maze Cave, Koji Kondo walks the same type of line between creepy and somewhat groovy, featuring tons of atmospheric sound design which alludes to a harrowing environment, yet at the core of it all, it contains the same funk bass line. Even non-Koji Kondo Mario composers will feature either this bassline or the chromatic trope in cave-themed levels, like in Mario Party 3's Creepy Cavern. This isn't the only cave trope the Mario universe features. For decades, the Mario Kart franchise has featured two instrumentations of the same tune in levels with indoor and outdoor environments. This manifests itself as a bright, cheerful version of the theme for outdoor and a darker, more ominous, reverby version for inside, as with Wario's Goldmine in the Wii version. The Banjo-Kazooie and Donkey Kong games released for Nintendo 64 use similar tactics to provide a sense of immersion. For all three games, Grant Kirkhope seems to have made unique instrumentations of the level themes, which reflect transitions to cave and even underwater areas within the levels. These are mainly just reverby, slower, or lower versions of their respective level themes, but just about every single Kirkhopean cavern from the 90s seems to contain a major shared element. This super low marimba tone which barely sounds like it's making a note. It seems especially quite noticeable in sort of these prehistoric style areas, so I'm guessing this is supposed to evoke the imagery of hitting bones. I'm also guessing that it's just a regular marimba patch, and these notes are just so low the pitch begins to break apart. Maybe that's why it's so effective at sounding like a primitive instrument. DK64 also features an entire level of this vibe called Crystal Cave, which plays an absolutely gorgeous theme, somewhat more serene than it is creepy. It also features some gorgeous pizzicato strings. In stark contrast to this ominous orchestral style, Sonic the Hedgehog games treat caves like their underground 90s dance parties. Mystic Cave Zone features an incredible slap bass line grooving out with some New Jack swing funkiness and sort of a Halloween-style lead line. Similar to the 1-2 Mario theme, Nakamura brings in chromatic background lines to emphasize the creepiness. I would also toss Rusty Ruin Zone from Sonic 3D Blast into this mix as far as levels with the funky Spelunky attitude. And speaking of party and funk, Sonic Adventure 2 does feature a Knuckles rap for their aquatic mine area. Mischief Makers is admittedly a side-scrolling 2D action platformer that I missed at the time, but it seems to have pretty innovative gameplay elements, honestly. The cave areas featured in this game again feature some absolutely wild sound design from this system. The core tune is not necessarily too nuts, but a lot of the elements in this track to me just sound like reversed industrial noises, and just seem generally unstable throughout. It also features some pizzicato strings. And this brings us to the proverbial Goldmine. Pokemon is rife with caves and generally ominous places to explore. And to be honest, I would say this franchise goes the hardest when it comes to leaning into the feeling of anxiety and danger lurking in the shadows. In fact, many of these tracks are detuned and atonal, yet still have distinct melodies which are used again and again through various Pokemon entries. The very first of these, the theme for the Rock Tunnel, is absolutely wild, much of it being constructed out of whole tone scale material, before devolving into an intense series of dissonant intervals, even shifting tempo at some points. The Rock Tunnel returns later on in a couple entries, and this tune from Diglett's Cave also appears multiple times throughout the series, and also features its fair share of playful dissonance. In its FireRed LeafGrean iteration, it even features some of the low marimbas similar to the Donkey Kong caves. And of course, modern chiptune soundtracks also continue to reference these types of spooky cave tropes. The Underground Path and Dweller's Path is an absolute throwdown of Game Boy-style sound design, an example of how such a limited system can be manipulated to produce a surreal, delay-like effect. And bringing us back full circle is this Rager composed for Shovel Knight's Mole Knight. This doesn't have as many particularly cavey elements, but it certainly harkens back to the 2D arcade and 2D Sonic eras, where it was all an underground party. On behalf of myself and the Jazzbots, thanks for spelunking through all these tunes with us. Massive shout out to Ashley Adler, the voice actress for Witchy. She's been doing voices in video games for years, and I'm honored to have her join the crew. I also want to give a massive shout out to the Biplets Patreon community, who made dope suggestions for this topic. My next video topic poll will be up tomorrow, and I usually keep those open for a few days. If you haven't already, please like, share, and subscribe. I'm getting quite close to the 1,000 sub mark, and then I can start focusing on trying to get this channel monetized. Have a dope week.